Stage 9 at Warner Bros. Studios in Burbank, California, October 1983. The kind of October that sits heavy in Southern California, dry air, pale light, the smell of plywood and cable grease baked into the concrete floor for 30 years. It was a Tuesday. The call sheet said 6:30, and by 6:28, 214 people were already on their marks. Grips, gaffers, stunt coordinators, second unit camera operators, catering staff moving quietly along the east wall with paper cups and aluminum trays. A major action production was 4 weeks from wrap. The budget had already overrun by $1,400,000. Nobody had time for anything that was not on the call sheet. The man who was about to make his entrance was not on the call sheet. He was 31 years old, 6 feet and 2 inches tall, 211 pounds of competitive fighting weight. Not stage weight. There is a difference. And the people in that room who knew what to look for would have seen it the moment he walked in. His name was known in 3 countries before he ever made a film. He had held a full-contact kickboxing record of 47 wins and 2 losses over an 8-year professional span. He had trained under 2 of the most respected coaches in the European circuit, and he had beaten men who went on to title bouts in Tokyo and Frankfurt. He was not a movie fighter. He was a fighter who had learned to look good on camera, which is a different and considerably more dangerous thing. He had been on this particular set for 6 days. He was playing a secondary antagonist, a role that would place him in the same frame as the lead for a total of 11 minutes of screen time. But he had spent those 6 days watching, measuring, reaching conclusions about the room, about the hierarchy, about where the respect gathered and where it did not. In 11 seconds, he was going to make a decision he could not take back. And if you want to know what happened in the 6 seconds that followed that decision, and what he said from the floor that nobody in that building forgot for the rest of their professional lives, then stay with this until the end, because those 6 seconds changed 2 careers. And what happened afterward changed the way an entire generation of stunt professionals understood what silence, patience, and 30 years of real work actually looked like in the body of one man. Nobody on Stage 9 that morning knew they were about to watch history fold itself into an ordinary Tuesday. The man they were watching had arrived in Hollywood 2 years earlier with a reputation that preceded him the way reputations do when they are built on evidence rather than publicity. His first screen test had been described by the casting director as, and these are the words that circulated through the industry for a season afterward, uncomfortably real. He did not perform danger. He carried it with him the way other men carry a wallet. He had the specific posture of someone who had been hit hard enough, often enough, that the possibility of being hit no longer required his attention. His body had simply filed that information away and moved on. His name was Erik Larson. Not a household name then. Not a household name now. In the way that some men pass through the exact center of their moment and leave almost no trace behind them, which is its own kind of story. What is known is the record. What is known is the footage from 4 international full-contact tournaments between 1976 and 1981. Footage that still exists in the archives of 2 martial arts federations. Footage that shows a young man with absolute economy of movement and an almost clinical capacity for reading distance. He did not waste motion. He did not perform. He competed, and he won the way serious men win, not with spectacle, but with accumulation. By the time he arrived on the lot in Burbank, he had been in 4 films. 3 of them had made modest returns in European markets. 1 of them had been picked up for limited American release, and had earned him enough notice to land this role. On this production, on this Tuesday morning in October, he had been watching the lead for 6 days. What he thought he saw was an older man. A man who moved carefully on set, who spoke quietly to the crew, who sat between setups in a folding chair near the camera monitors and said almost nothing. A man whose name was on the poster, and who carried that fact with the particular kind of ease that Larson had decided, over 6 days of watching, was not earned, but inherited. A man, he had concluded, whose reputation had outgrown whatever had originally produced it. He was about to discover how wrong a careful observer can be when the thing he is observing has decided not to be seen. The incident began at 9:47 in the morning, between a rehearsal and a camera setup. The set was in a transitional state, crew moving, equipment being repositioned. The particular organized disorder of a film production between its beats. The lead was standing near the east wall, talking to the first assistant director, a woman named Carol Metz, who had been in the industry for 19 years, and who would later describe what she witnessed, with a precision that suggested she had been replaying it at regular intervals ever since. Larson walked across the floor with the specific intention of a man who has decided that something needs to happen, and has assigned himself the responsibility of making it happen. He crossed 42 feet of concrete. He stopped 4 feet behind the man he had been watching for 6 days. And then he said something. At volume. that carried across the floor and landed in the ears of 11 people who were close enough to hear the individual words and not just the tone. What he said was, "I've been watching you for a week. You move like a man who hasn't been in a real fight since before I was born." The floor went quiet the way floors go quiet when something happens that everyone understands is real and not part of any script. Carol Metz would later say that she set her clipboard down on the equipment case beside her, not because she was startled, because she understood, in the specific way that 19 years of production experience teaches a person to understand certain moments, that whatever was about to happen was going to require her full attention and both of her hands free. The boom operator, a 26-year-old named Dennis Faraday, who was on only his second major studio production, stopped walking. He was carrying 40 pounds of equipment, and he set it down on the floor, gently, without looking away from the two men. A lighting technician on the west catwalk stopped moving entirely. The catwalk was 31 feet above the stage floor. He held a piece of rigging in both hands, and he did not put it down, and he did not continue his work. He stayed exactly where he was. Larson had not finished. He said, "At the same volume, I could teach your stunt team something in 20 minutes that you haven't learned in 30 years. I'm standing here saying that to your face because I think you've gotten comfortable being respected for things that happened a long time ago. Now, if you want to find out what happened in the next 6 seconds, make sure you are subscribed and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. Every week we tell a story that the celebrity press never told, and if you are not subscribed, the algorithm is not going to bring you back for the next one." The man at the east wall did not turn around immediately. That detail matters. He finished the sentence he had been saying to Carol Metz. He finished it completely, without rushing, without changing his register. Carol Metz would remember the sentence. It was about the camera angle for the next setup. He finished it, nodded once, and then he turned. He was wearing a white t-shirt, jeans, a pair of low canvas shoes that belonged to the wardrobe department, and that he had been wearing since the 6:30 call because his own shoes were in the trailer and he had not needed them yet. He had a coffee cup in his left hand. He set it down on the equipment case beside Carol Metz with a deliberate and unhurried movement. The specific way a man sets something down when he knows he will want both hands in approximately 4 seconds and does not want to waste the motion of putting them anywhere else. He did not bounce. He did not adjust his footing. He did not roll his neck or rotate his shoulders or do any of the things that men do when they are preparing for a confrontation they are uncertain about. He stood exactly as he had been standing. He looked at Erik Larson. He said, "All right." 2 words, no question mark, no elevation of pitch. The specific register of a man for whom what was about to happen was not a surprise, not an escalation, not a disruption of his morning, but simply the next thing. A fight is not 2 men choosing to hit each other. A fight is a conversation about distance, conducted in the language of geometry. The man who controls the gap between 2 bodies controls every option available to both of them. He decides when the conversation begins. He decides when it ends. He decides which techniques are physically possible and which are not. The man who does not understand this will always be responding. The man who does understand it will always be choosing. At a distance of 4 feet, Larson's options were a lead jab, a front kick to the midsection, or a shift to close the range for a clinch or a knee. Those were the available geometries. A man with 47 professional wins knows this without thinking about it. It is stored somewhere below conscious calculation, in the same place that a trained pianist stores the fingering for a passage he has played 10,000 times. What Larson threw was the front kick. It was the correct choice. It was fast. It was technically sound. It was thrown with the specific commitment that separates a professional kick from a theatrical one. The hip drove through, the supporting foot pivoted. The instep tracked toward the center of the target. It did not land. Second one, the kick left the floor. At the instant of commitment, the man in the white t-shirt moved. Not backward, laterally 4 inches to his left, which is the wrong direction from the perspective of anyone who has not been in enough fights to know that lateral movement against a front kick does not interrupt the kick. It makes the kick pass through empty air and deliver the kicker's weight to a foot that is not yet back on the ground. Second 2. The kick completed its arc through the space where a midsection had been and was no longer. Larson's foot returned to the floor. His weight was fractionally forward. At this moment, Dennis Faraday on the floor of stage 9 said, much later, that he understood for the first time in his life what people meant when they described seeing something and not being able to follow it. He said, "I watched the whole thing, and I still couldn't tell you exactly what happened between second 2 and second 4. I just know what was on the floor at second 5. Second 3, a movement from the man in the white t-shirt that covered approximately 18 inches of horizontal space and involved his right hand in a way that none of the 11 witnesses would describe identically, because they were all watching from different angles, and because the movement was completed before any of them had finished processing that it had started. Second 4, Larson's second attempt, which was a right cross thrown from instinct rather than from plan, which is to say it was the kind of punch a trained man throws when his body has decided to cover a situation that his mind has not yet caught up to. It did not connect. The man in the white t-shirt was no longer in its path. Second 5. Erik Larson was on the floor of stage 9. He was on his back. He had not been thrown in the theatrical sense of the word. He had not traveled through the air or performed any arc that required description. He was simply no longer standing, in the way that a very specific kind of controlled technique deposits a man on the ground without ceremony or drama, as if standing had become structurally unavailable to him, and the floor was simply where gravity took over. Second 6. The man in the white t-shirt was standing approximately 2 feet from where Larson had landed. His right hand was extended, palm open, at a height and angle that was not accidental. It was positioned exactly 1 inch from the left side of Larson's jaw, not touching. Held, the way a man holds a door open when he has already decided not to walk through it. He held it there for 3 full seconds. Carol Metz had both hands flat on the equipment case. She would describe the specific sound of the stage in those 3 seconds as the kind of quiet that has weight to it, like the air before a pressure change. Dennis Faraday had not moved. He was still standing beside the equipment he had set down. He would later say that he did not move because he did not know yet whether what he had witnessed was over. The lighting technician on the west catwalk was still holding the rigging in both hands. The man in the white t-shirt withdrew his hand. He did not step back. He stood where he was, and he looked down at Erik Larson on the floor of stage 9, and he spoke in a register that Carol Metz, who was the closest of the 11 witnesses, described as the kind of voice that is quiet, because it does not need to be anything else. What he said to Larson, nobody else heard. Those words traveled the distance between 2 men and went no further. Carol Metz heard the cadence, and not the content. Dennis Faraday heard nothing. The lighting technician on the catwalk heard nothing. What Larson heard, lying on the floor of stage 9 with a man's hand withdrawn from 1 inch in front of his face, is something he was asked about twice in the years that followed, and both times he declined to repeat it. What he said on both occasions, and this is a thing that the people who heard it thought about afterward for a long time, was, it wasn't what he said. It was that he needed to say very few words to say all of it. Erik Larson had a choice. He lay on the floor of stage 9 for approximately 4 seconds after the words were spoken. 4 seconds is a long time when 214 people are watching, and the weight of the air is what Carol Metz described. He could have stood up with a reason. He could have found the language that men find when they need to carry a defeat away from a public place without putting it down first. That language exists. Most men know it. It involves physics or distraction or the implicit suggestion that the outcome would have been different under marginally different conditions. The language is available. It has been used in rooms like this one for as long as rooms like this one have existed. Erik Larson stood up without it. He stood up with the specific economy of a man who has been on the floor enough times to know how to return from it without making the return itself a performance. He straightened. He looked at the man in the white t-shirt, and he said, I was wrong about what I was looking at. Nothing else. No elaboration. No mechanism of retreat. 6 words that took the full weight of what had happened and placed it where it belonged, which was on the man who had issued a public judgment and been answered with a private education. The man in the white t-shirt picked up his coffee cup from the equipment case where he had set it down 41 seconds earlier. He turned back to Carol Metz and resumed, at exactly the register he had been using before, the conversation about the camera angle for the next setup. That was Chuck Norris. 53 years old in October 1983, 5 feet 10 inches tall, 178 pounds, which was 12 pounds less than his competitive fighting weight from the years when his competitive fighting weight was something anyone needed to account for. 7-time professional middleweight karate champion, undefeated from 1968 through his retirement from competition. The man who had trained under Bruce Lee and had been asked, during the production of Way of the Dragon, to be the only man Bruce Lee would show losing a fight, because Bruce Lee had decided that the loss had to be believable, which meant it had to be performed by someone who a serious audience would believe could win. He was, in October 1983, in the middle of a film career that was 4 years old and already considerably larger than anyone outside of his immediate circle had predicted. Missing in Action was in post-production. Code of Silence was in development. The decade that was about to belong to him was already beginning to take its shape, and nobody in that building who had watched what happened on stage 9 at 9:47 in the morning was confused about why. He never told the story. That is the detail that the people who were there would come back to in the years that followed, in the green rooms and production offices and late conversations that the industry runs on. He had been in a confrontation in front of 214 people. He had been told publicly by a younger and larger man that his skills were the artifact of a reputation rather than a reality, and he had answered that claim in the only language that does not require interpretation. And then he had picked up his coffee cup and resumed talking about a camera angle. He never brought it up. Not to the director, not to the producers, not to the trades, not in any interview in the years that followed. And there were many years and many interviews. The story moved through the community the way those stories move. From the 11 witnesses on stage 9 to the assistants and coordinators and second unit personnel who heard it within the week, to the stunt community and the martial arts community, and eventually to the wider industry conversation that keeps track of such things. It mutated in transit, the way all oral histories do. In some versions, Larson was a stunt coordinator rather than an actor. In some versions, the exchange took place on a different production entirely. In some versions, there were words spoken at volume that were never spoken. In one version, which circulated for almost a year in certain circles, Larson had required medical attention, which was not true, and which was precisely the kind of addition that a story collects when it travels far enough from the room where the thing actually happened. What did not change, across every version, across every retelling, across the 4 decades since October 1983, was the 6 seconds. Every witness account of the 6 seconds is consistent. The kick, the lateral movement, the floor, the hand withdrawn from 1 inch, the silence. Those details hold. The details that cannot be verified are the ones that grew. The center is the same. Dennis Faraday went on to a career in sound that spanned 3 decades and included 11 studio productions and 2 independent films that received significant festival attention. He gave one interview, late in his career, in which he was asked about the most memorable thing he had witnessed on a set in 30 years. He did not hesitate. He described Stage 9 in October 1983. He said, "I've been on 100 sets. I've seen a lot of things that were designed to be impressive and weren't. What I saw that morning was not designed to be anything. That's the only time I've ever seen that." Carol Metz retired from production in 2009 after a career of 31 years and more than 40 studio credits. She kept a production journal, as many long career coordinators do, and the entry for October 18th, 1983 is 2 paragraphs long, which is longer than most entries in a production journal that is fundamentally a logistical document. The 2 paragraphs describe the morning on stage 9 in specific and careful language. The last sentence of the second paragraph reads, "In its entirety, what I understood watching that was that 30 years of real work looks nothing like what I had expected 30 years of real work to look like. The lighting technician on the West Catwalk, whose name does not appear in any of the accounts that survive, because he left the industry within 2 years of that morning and no one retained his contact information, told the story at a gathering of former crew members in 2004. He said that what he remembered most was not the 6 seconds. He said that what he remembered most was the coffee cup, the way it was set down before anything happened, and the way it was picked up after, with the same hand, at the same deliberate pace, as if everything in between had been a parenthesis in a sentence that had always been about the camera angle. There is a kind of strength that announces itself, and a kind of strength that does not. The strength that announces itself needs the announcement. It draws on external confirmation the way a fire draws on oxygen. Without it, it diminishes. The strength that does not announce itself is drawing on something that exists whether or not anyone is watching, whether or not the room is full or empty, whether or not the coffee cup ever gets picked back up. The difference between those 2 kinds of strength is not always visible from the outside, but it becomes visible with great clarity in certain rooms on certain mornings. When a specific kind of test makes the specific kind of demand that reveals which of the 2 you are actually carrying. What Eric Larson saw that he had not seen in 6 days of watching was not a technique. Techniques can be cataloged and studied and countered. What he saw was something that cannot be acquired by catalog or countered by preparation, because it is not a thing that a man adds to himself in a training camp or a weight room or a film school. It is a thing that a man becomes or does not become over a very long time through a very specific kind of accumulation. He saw the difference between reputation and evidence. He saw what 30 years of real work looks like in the body of a man who never stopped doing it, even when he no longer needed to. Even when the room was watching for different things, even when the coffee cup was still in his hand. That was Chuck Norris. And the lesson he taught on stage 9 at 9:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in October 1983, without raising his voice or his pulse, is the same lesson he has been teaching since 1968 in every dojo and every film and every frame of footage that has ever carried his face, which is simply this: the man who has nothing left to prove is the most dangerous man in any room, and the man who believes he has has found an opponent who has grown comfortable has usually found the opposite. Next week, we are going to tell you about the evening in 1977 when a decorated Special Forces veteran walked into Chuck Norris's school in Sherman Oaks, California, with 14 years of combat experience and a very specific idea about what that experience entitled him to say, what he said, what he found out, and why 3 of his colleagues who were there that night never trained with anyone else again. That story has never been told on this channel. We are going to tell it the way it deserves to be told. If you are not subscribed, you are going to miss it.